The morning rush filled the train station with steady noise and fast footsteps. People moved in lines that kept changing shape as trains arrived and left. Rolling bags bumped over the tiles, and warm air from coffee shops mixed with the cold wind that slipped in through the doors. Above everything, a calm voice announced departures, but most travelers barely listened. They stared at phones, checked tickets, and hurried forward with tired eyes. It looked like a normal day, but the officers on duty never treated it that way. They watched faces, hands, and the small choices people made when they thought no one was paying attention. Officer Ben stood near the center walkway where the crowd split toward different platforms. He was not tall, but he carried himself with quiet confidence. His uniform was neat, and his eyes moved often, scanning without staring. Beside him was Rex, a police dog with sharp ears and a steady focus. Rex walked close to Ben's left leg, calm but ready, as if he could feel every shift in the air. Ben trusted Rex more than any machine, because Rex did not guess. Rex noticed. Ben and Rex started a slow patrol along the entrance gates. They moved past a row of benches where an old man held a paper bag on his lap. They passed a family with 2 small kids, each holding a bright balloon. Rex sniffed the air, then lowered his nose toward a backpack resting by a woman's feet. The woman smiled nervously, but Ben gave a small nod to keep her calm. Rex sniffed once more, then moved on without interest. Ben's pace stayed relaxed, because panic made crowds dangerous, and calm made them predictable. Near a ticket machine, Officer Mira was helping an elderly woman who looked confused. Mira was younger than Ben but had the same focused energy. She spoke slowly and pointed to the correct platform on a small map. The woman thanked her and walked away with a lighter step. Mira looked up and caught Ben's eye for a moment. Ben returned a short nod, and Mira went back to her spot near the gates. The 2 officers worked as a team without needing many words. A new group entered through the main doors, and the flow of people shifted again. Ben turned slightly so he could see the entrance more clearly. Rex's ears moved as if he could hear something under the normal station noise. Ben followed Rex's attention and noticed a man in a dark coat carrying a large black cello case. The case was tall and smooth, with strong straps and a metal handle. It looked like something a musician would carry, and the man held it close, careful not to bump it into anyone. He walked with purpose, but his shoulders were tense. At first, Ben did not think much of it. Instruments were common in a station with a city orchestra nearby. Still, Ben watched the man's hands and his face. The man kept looking ahead, but his eyes darted briefly toward the officers and then away. He adjusted his grip on the handle as if it felt heavier than expected. Rex's nose lifted higher, and he began to pull slightly forward. Ben tightened his hold on the leash, not to stop Rex, but to guide him with control. Rex moved toward the man and the cello case as if drawn by a clear signal. Ben walked beside Rex, keeping a respectful distance from the passing crowd. The man noticed Rex and slowed down. For a moment, he turned his body so the case stayed between him and the dog. His movement was small, but it stood out because it was unnecessary. Ben felt the warning rise inside him, not as fear, but as alert attention. He raised one hand gently, signaling the man to pause. The man stopped near a pillar that held a station map. Ben spoke in a calm voice and asked if everything was fine. The man nodded quickly and said he was just late for his train. His voice was steady, but his breath was not. He kept swallowing, as if his mouth had gone dry. Rex stepped closer, nose aimed directly at the cello case. Rex sniffed the seam near the lock, then the handle, then the lower corner. His body stiffened in a way Ben had seen before. Rex froze, and then he barked once, sharp and loud. The bark bounced off the high ceiling and made several people turn their heads. The man's grip tightened on the handle, and his knuckles turned pale. Ben stayed calm, but he shifted his stance so he had a clear line between the man and the crowd. Rex barked again, louder, and then planted his paws firmly as if refusing to move away. Ben's heart beat faster, but his face stayed controlled. He knew the crowd would react to his expression before they reacted to anything else. Ben spoke again, slower, telling the man to set the case down gently. The man hesitated, and his eyes flicked toward the nearest exit. Ben noticed the glance and took a step closer. His voice stayed polite but firm. He asked for the man's ticket and identification. The man said he left them in his pocket, then fumbled for a moment as if his fingers would not work. Rex kept barking, and his nose pressed against the case again, as if the case itself was the source of the problem. People nearby began to back away. A few pulled out phones, but security staff waved their hands and asked them to move along. The station did not need panic, and it did not need a crowd forming a circle. Ben signaled to a nearby guard to clear space. The guard nodded and started guiding passengers toward the other side of the hall. Ben kept his body angled to protect the people behind him. Rex stayed locked on the cello case like it was the only thing in the world. Officer Mira noticed the commotion and moved closer at a quick walk. She read the scene instantly, and her face tightened with focus. She did not rush in with loud questions. She came to Ben's side and kept her eyes on the man and the case. Ben told her in a low voice that Rex was alerting. Mira nodded and glanced at Rex, then at the case, then back at the man's face. The man looked like he was trying to hold himself together, but fear was leaking through every small movement. Ben asked the man a simple question about the instrument. He asked where the man was going and who owned the cello. The man answered fast, saying it belonged to his brother, and that his brother was already on the platform. Ben listened, but he did not accept the words as proof. He watched the man's hands and shoulders. The man kept shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Rex's barking did not stop, and that was what mattered most. Mira crouched slightly near Rex without touching him. She spoke softly to keep Rex steady and to reduce the sharpness of his barking. Rex still barked, but his body stayed controlled, not wild. Mira then leaned closer to the cello case and looked along the side. Her eyes narrowed as she noticed tiny marks near the handle area. They looked like small holes, placed in a line, almost hidden by the case's texture. Mira felt a chill, because those holes did not belong on a normal instrument case. Ben saw her expression and understood that this was not a simple check anymore. Ben asked the man to step back and keep his hands visible. The man took a step back, but he did it slowly, as if he was afraid to leave the case alone. Ben told him again, calm and clear, that the officers needed to inspect the case for safety reasons. The man started to speak, but his words broke and restarted. He said he did not want the case damaged. Ben replied that they would handle it carefully. Rex barked again, and this time the bark sounded less like warning and more like urgency. A station supervisor arrived, and Mira asked for a quiet area to be cleared. The supervisor called for more security and guided people away from the center walkway. The crowd thinned, but the feeling in the air grew heavier. Even people who did not know what was happening could sense that something serious was unfolding. The normal noise of the station continued, but it felt distant now, like a radio in another room. Ben took a slow breath and reached toward the lock on the cello case. He did not force anything. He looked for a keyhole and saw a small padlock attached to a metal loop. The lock looked new and stronger than the kind musicians usually used. Ben asked the man for the key. The man's eyes widened, and he shook his head. He said his brother had the key. Ben kept his voice even and asked again. The man's lips pressed together, and his chest rose and fell faster. Mira stood up and spoke to Ben in a low voice. She told him about the small holes. Ben nodded once, then looked at Rex, who was still fixed on the case, still certain. Ben felt a tight knot in his stomach, not because he wanted to imagine the worst, but because he knew Rex never acted like this without reason. Ben signaled to Mira to call for a medical team to stand by, just in case. Mira stepped aside and made the call, keeping her voice calm and professional. The man stood near the pillar, hands raised slightly, eyes flicking between Ben and the case. He looked like someone waiting for a door to open, but not the kind of door that led to freedom. Ben did not rush. He knew the next seconds would matter, and rushing would create mistakes. Rex's barking slowed for a moment, then began again in short bursts, as if he was pushing the officers to act. Ben reached for a tool carried by a nearby security officer. He positioned himself so his body blocked the case from the view of the wider station, protecting privacy and preventing panic. Mira returned to his side, ready to assist. Ben placed one hand on the case to steady it, then moved carefully to the lock. The metal felt cold under his fingers. The man whispered something under his breath that Ben could not hear clearly. Ben tightened his grip, ready to open the case in a controlled way. Rex leaned forward, nose pressed against the seam, and gave one more firm bark. Mira held her breath without meaning to. The station noise seemed to fade again, as if the building itself was listening. Ben took a slow breath and began to open the lock. Ben worked on the lock with slow, careful movements as if time itself had slowed around his hands. The metal clicked softly when the tool found the right angle, and the sound felt louder than it should have been in the wide station hall. Rex stayed pressed close to the case, body tense but controlled, as if he knew the moment was close. Mira stood slightly behind Ben, ready to step in if anything changed. The man near the pillar watched every movement with wide eyes, his breathing shallow and uneven. When the lock finally opened, Ben did not lift the lid all at once. He raised it just a little, enough to look inside without exposing everything. A faint movement caught his eye, something that did not belong inside a cello case. He froze for a brief moment, then opened the lid a bit more. The sight inside made his chest tighten, not with fear, but with sudden understanding. This was not about danger in the way people usually expected. This was about something fragile. Inside the case was a small child, curled tightly and wrapped in a thin blanket. The child's eyes were open, wide and shining, staring upward as if afraid to blink. A small hand clutched a worn cloth toy, pressed close to the chest. The child made no sound at first, as if silence was the only way to stay safe. The air around the case felt heavy, and for a moment no one spoke. Mira stepped forward immediately and gently took the child into her arms. Her movements were slow and careful, like she was afraid the child might vanish if handled too roughly. The child let out a small sound, not a cry, but a shaky breath that said more than words ever could. Mira held the child close, speaking softly in a calm, steady voice. She told the child that everything was all right now and that they were safe. Rex stopped barking the moment the child was lifted from the case. He sat down beside Ben, tail resting on the floor, ears still alert but no longer tense. His job was done, and he seemed to know it. Ben knelt briefly beside Rex and placed a hand on his back, grounding himself in the familiar presence of the dog. Then he stood again and turned his attention to the man near the pillar. The man had sunk down onto the bench beside him, his face buried in his hands. His shoulders shook as quiet sobs escaped him. When Ben spoke to him, his voice was firm but not harsh. Ben asked the man to explain what had happened. The man lifted his head slowly, eyes red and filled with guilt. He said the child belonged to his sister, who was too afraid to travel openly. He said she believed hiding the child was the only way to protect them from someone who meant harm. Ben listened without interrupting. He did not judge in that moment. His job was to understand and to keep everyone safe. Mira adjusted the blanket around the child and carried them toward a quieter corner where medics were arriving. The medics moved with calm efficiency, checking the child's breathing and warmth. The child stayed quiet, eyes following Mira closely, as if she was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly changed. Passengers who had been cleared from the area now watched from a distance. Their faces showed shock and concern rather than fear. Some covered their mouths. Others whispered softly. No one took out a phone now. The moment felt too real for that. Station security continued guiding people along alternate paths, keeping the space calm and controlled. The normal flow of the station resumed slowly, but a sense of shared awareness lingered in the air. Ben spoke again to the man, asking why he had chosen such a risky method. The man said he knew it was wrong, but he felt trapped by the situation. He said he thought the case would not be questioned because musicians passed through every day. He did not expect a police dog to notice. As he spoke, his voice cracked, and he admitted he had been terrified the entire time. Ben nodded, understanding that fear often led people to make choices they would never make in calm moments. Mira returned after the medics confirmed the child was stable. She told Ben the child was dehydrated but alert and responsive. The relief in Ben's chest was immediate, though he kept his expression professional. He thanked the medics and asked them to stay nearby until further arrangements were made. Mira stayed close to the child, offering quiet reassurance through gentle words and steady presence. Rex stood up and walked a slow circle around the area, sniffing lightly as if double-checking that nothing else required his attention. Satisfied, he returned to Ben's side. A few officers nearby smiled softly at him, understanding the importance of what he had done. Ben felt a deep sense of respect for the dog, knowing that without Rex's instincts, the situation might have ended very differently. The station supervisor approached Ben and Mira to get an update. Ben explained the situation clearly and briefly, focusing on the safety outcome rather than the shock. The supervisor nodded and coordinated with child services to ensure proper care for the child. Everything moved step by step, without rush, but without delay. The system worked best when everyone stayed focused on what mattered most. The man was escorted gently to another area for further questioning. He did not resist. He walked with his head lowered, hands visible, no longer hiding anything. As he passed the open cello case, he glanced at it one last time, his expression filled with regret. The case stood empty now, its purpose revealed, no longer a disguise but a reminder of a desperate choice. Mira stayed seated with the child on a nearby bench, letting the child lean against her shoulder. The child's grip on the cloth toy loosened slightly, and their breathing became more even. Mira smiled softly, not forcing conversation, just offering quiet safety. She knew trust took time, and right now, presence was enough. Ben watched the scene for a moment, then looked around the station. Trains continued to arrive and depart. People continued their journeys, unaware of how close they had been to tragedy. The noise returned gradually, but the officers who had witnessed the moment carried a deeper awareness with them. Ben felt it settle inside him, a reminder of why attention and patience mattered. A young guard approached Ben and asked quietly how Rex knew. Ben smiled faintly and said Rex was trained to notice what people missed. He added that sometimes the most important signals were the quiet ones hidden beneath normal life. The guard nodded, clearly moved by the experience. As arrangements continued, Mira looked up at Ben and shared a brief glance that said everything words could not. They had both chosen this work knowing it would bring long days and heavy moments. Still, moments like this reminded them why they stayed. A life had been protected. A silent danger had been revealed. And a single bark had made all the difference. Rex lay down at Ben's feet, calm and relaxed now. Ben rested a hand on Rex's side, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. The station felt different to Ben now, not quieter, but clearer. He knew that when the next patrol began, he would walk the same halls again with the same care. Because on ordinary days, extraordinary things could still be hidden in plain sight. The station finally felt calmer, but Ben knew the calm was only on the surface. He watched the crowd from a distance as if he could still hear Rex's bark echoing in the high ceiling. Mira sat with the child near a quiet office area, keeping a warm coat around the small shoulders. The child's eyes moved carefully from face to face, as if checking who was safe and who was not. Rex stayed close, lying on the floor like a silent guard, his ears lifting whenever someone new walked by. Ben could feel the weight of responsibility settle deeper, because saving someone was only the first step, and the next steps mattered just as much. A station manager opened a small staff room for them, away from the noise and the staring eyes. Mira carried the child inside and sat on a chair near the wall, leaving space so the child did not feel trapped. Ben stood near the door, not blocking it, but keeping watch. A medic brought water and a light snack, offering it gently without pressure. The child hesitated, then took small sips, watching Mira closely the entire time. Mira spoke softly and introduced herself again, repeating her name slowly so it would sound familiar. She asked the child's name in a kind voice, like it was a normal question on a normal day. After a long pause, the child whispered a simple name, and Mira nodded as if she had been told something very important. Ben listened carefully and memorized it, because names mattered in moments like this. The child held the cloth toy tighter, then relaxed again, as if even that small act of speaking had taken effort. Mira told the child that they were safe and that no one would put them back in the case. She promised it in a calm, steady way, not dramatic, just certain. The child looked down, then back up, and gave a tiny nod. In another room nearby, the man who carried the case sat across from an officer and a station security lead. His hands were folded tightly in his lap, and his shoulders were slumped, as if he had been carrying more than the case. He told them his name was Sam, and he said he was not proud of what he did. He admitted that the plan was not his idea, but he agreed to it because he felt pressured and afraid. He said his sister had called him the night before, crying and begging for help. He said she believed someone was searching for them, and she did not trust anyone to protect the child in time. Ben entered that room quietly and listened while Sam spoke. Ben asked where the sister was now, and Sam stared at the floor before answering. He said she was supposed to meet him after the train ride, near a parking area a few streets away. He said she had planned to take the child and leave the city quickly. Ben asked why they did not seek proper help instead. Sam rubbed his face and said his sister feared being blamed, and she feared losing the child if she told the truth. Ben stayed calm, but he felt a sharp frustration because fear could not excuse such a risky choice. Mira stepped into the doorway and signaled to Ben that the child was stable and resting. Ben gave a small nod and returned his attention to Sam. He asked for the sister's full name and phone number, and Sam gave it after a pause. The officer took the information carefully and began calling the number. It went to voicemail twice, and the room fell quiet each time. Ben asked Sam about the child's home situation and whether the child had any other family. Sam said the child's father was not in the picture, and the child's mother had been raising the child alone. Ben decided to focus on facts that could be verified. He asked where the sister lived and what car she drove. Sam described the car and gave a general location, then added that she might already be moving because she would panic if Sam did not arrive. Ben told the security lead to watch the station exits and check the nearby parking zones for the car. He also told another officer to speak with train staff and review platform footage to see if anyone was tracking Sam's movements. Everything needed to be handled carefully, because a frightened person could make another bad decision. Ben did not want that to happen again. In the staff room, Mira sat beside the child and kept her tone gentle and steady. She asked simple questions, one at a time, and waited for answers without pushing. She asked if the child felt cold, and the child shook their head slowly. She asked if the child was hurt anywhere, and the child quietly said no. She asked if the child knew why they were in the case, and the child looked away and did not answer. Mira did not press for details, because she knew fear could lock a child's voice. She simply said that what happened was not the child's fault, and that adults were responsible for keeping kids safe. Rex lifted his head and walked toward the child, moving slowly as if asking permission. The child stared at Rex, uncertain at first, then reached out and touched the fur lightly. Rex sat down and stayed still, letting the child choose the pace. Mira watched the child's shoulders loosen a little, like the body was finally learning how to breathe again. She smiled softly and told the child that Rex was a good helper. The child looked at Rex and whispered that he was brave. Mira agreed, and for a moment the room felt warmer. Back in the questioning room, Sam's phone buzzed, and he jumped as if shocked by the sound. He looked down and said his sister was calling. Ben told him to answer on speaker, and Sam nodded quickly. The sister's voice came through, tight and panicked, asking where he was and why he was not responding. Sam tried to speak calmly, but his voice shook. Ben leaned forward and introduced himself, speaking in a respectful tone. He told her the child was safe and receiving care, and he said they needed to talk in person to make sure everything was handled properly. The sister became silent for a moment, then asked if she was in trouble. Ben answered carefully, saying their priority was safety and truth. He told her she needed to come to the station office area, and he promised that the child would not be separated from familiar support without proper steps. Mira listened from the doorway and could tell the sister was terrified. Mira gently asked Ben for the phone, and Ben handed it to her. Mira spoke in a calmer, softer voice, explaining that she was sitting with the child right now. She said the child was warm and safe, and she said the sister could come see the child soon, but she needed to arrive calmly. The sister's breath sounded uneven through the phone, but her voice softened when she heard that the child was safe. She said she would come, and she said she was only a few minutes away. Ben signaled to the security lead to monitor the entrance and guide her to the office. He also asked for a child services worker to be present, not as punishment, but as protection and support. The goal was to build a safe plan, not create a new crisis. Sam lowered his head again, tears forming as relief and shame mixed together. Ben told him that honesty now mattered more than fear, and Sam nodded. Minutes later, a woman arrived at the office hallway, moving fast but trying to control herself. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and her hands shook as she held her phone. A security guard guided her toward Ben and Mira, and she stopped when she saw them. Ben kept his voice gentle and asked her to breathe and take one step at a time. Mira opened the staffroom door and let her see the child sitting with Rex nearby. The woman's face broke with emotion, and she covered her mouth as if she could not believe what she was seeing. The child looked up, recognized her, and leaned forward. Mira allowed the woman to enter slowly, keeping the space calm and safe. The woman knelt down and held the child carefully, whispering apologies in a shaky voice. The child held onto her and began to cry softly, the first real release since the case was opened. Mira placed a steady hand on the woman's shoulder and told her the child was alive and safe, and that what happened next would be handled with care. Ben watched the scene and felt the tension in his chest ease slightly. He knew there were still questions to answer, and there would still be consequences and steps to take. But in that moment, one truth stood above everything else, because the child was no longer hidden, no longer silent, and no longer alone. The small staffroom stayed quiet except for the child's soft crying and the woman's shaky breathing. Mira kept her body relaxed and her voice low, letting the moment settle naturally. Ben stood near the door with Rex at his side, giving the family space while still keeping the situation safe. The woman held the child carefully, as if afraid that even a small movement could break what was left of trust. The child's hands clung to her coat, and the cloth toy rested between them like a small bridge back to comfort. Rex sat calmly on the floor, watching without moving, as if he understood that this was a fragile moment that needed calm more than anything. After a few minutes, the child's breathing became steadier. The woman wiped the child's face gently and whispered that everything would be okay now. Mira offered water again, and the child took a few sips while leaning against the woman. Ben observed the child's posture and eyes, looking for signs of panic or distress. The child still seemed wary, but the fear had softened into tiredness. Mira knew tiredness was often the first sign that the body finally believed it was safe. She spoke softly and told the woman her name again, and she told Ben's name too, making the scene feel more normal and less like a storm. Ben asked the woman to step into the hallway for a moment, so they could talk without the child hearing everything. The woman hesitated, then looked at the child. Mira assured her that the child would stay with her and Rex would remain nearby. The woman nodded and stood slowly, still holding the child for a second longer before gently passing the child back into Myra's arms. The child resisted at first, then relaxed when Mira promised the woman would return in a moment. The woman walked into the hallway with Ben, her hands still shaking. Ben spoke in a calm, steady tone and explained that the child was safe, and that the next steps would focus on protection and proper support. He said they needed the full truth to make a plan that would not risk the child again. The woman swallowed and nodded. She admitted she panicked, and she admitted she made a choice that she now regretted deeply. She said she believed someone was following her, and she felt trapped by fear and confusion. Ben asked who she thought was following her, and she answered in vague terms, saying it was someone from her past who made her feel unsafe. Ben did not push for dramatic details. He asked for clear facts that could be checked, because facts helped officers protect people properly. Mira stepped into the hallway with a child services worker named Noor, a calm woman with a warm face and a professional tone. Noor introduced herself and explained that her role was to keep the child safe and help the family find stable support. She spoke in simple words, not legal terms, because she knew fear could make people stop listening. The woman nodded again, tears returning to her eyes. She said she wanted help, and she said she did not want to hide anymore. Ben felt a small shift in the air, because willingness to cooperate was the first step toward a safer future. Noor asked the woman about the child's normal routine and whether they had a stable home that night. The woman said they had a small apartment and enough food, but she had been too scared to stay there. Noor listened and asked if any trusted relatives could support them. The woman mentioned Sam, then quickly added that she did not want him blamed for everything. Ben explained that Sam's role would be reviewed fairly, and that the focus right now was to prevent any further risk. The woman nodded and said she understood. Noor then asked if the woman would agree to a safety plan that included temporary monitoring and support services. The woman hesitated, then agreed, saying she wanted what was best for the child. Ben returned to the staff room with Mira and Noor. The child sat on the chair now, legs dangling, holding the cloth toy in one hand. Rex lay near the chair with his head on his paws, calm and present. When the woman walked back in, the child reached out immediately, and the woman sat beside the child and held the small hand gently. Noor spoke softly and explained what would happen next. She said they would take the child and the mother to a nearby support center for a proper check and a calm resting space. She said the mother would remain with the child, and that the goal was safety and stability. The child listened quietly, then looked at Mira. Mira offered a small smile and told the child that Ben and Rex would stay close until they were safely on their way. The child looked at Rex and asked in a small voice if Rex could come too. Mira said Rex had to stay with Ben to help other people, but she promised Rex would always do his job to keep people safe. Rex lifted his head and made a soft sound, then rested again, as if giving the child a quiet goodbye. The child reached down and patted Rex's fur one more time. The child's hand moved slowly, careful and gentle, like someone learning trust. Outside in the station hall, life continued, but the officers who knew the truth carried a different feeling. Ben spoke with the station manager about keeping the report private and respectful, because the child's dignity mattered. The manager agreed and told staff to avoid spreading rumors. Ben appreciated that, because stories could become harsh when people did not know the human cost. Mira gathered the child's small items, including the cloth toy and the blanket, and placed them in a clean bag. She also took a photo of the air holes on the cello case for the report, because the details mattered. The case itself was secured for evidence, not to punish, but to document how it happened and prevent it from happening again. Sam was brought into the office hallway to speak briefly with Noor and Ben. Sam looked exhausted, but he stood up straight when he saw the child through the doorway. He did not try to approach without permission. He simply looked, eyes full of regret, and whispered that he was sorry. The woman glanced at him, anger and sadness mixing on her face. Then she nodded slightly, not forgiving everything, but acknowledging that fear had pulled them all into the same storm. Ben told Sam to cooperate fully and to be honest in every statement. Sam agreed. He said he would do whatever was needed to help fix what had been broken. A short time later, a vehicle arrived with 2 support staff members. Noor guided the mother and child toward the exit through a quieter route. Mira walked with them, carrying the bag of belongings. Ben and Rex followed a few steps behind, keeping the path clear. The child looked back once at the station hall, eyes still wide, then looked forward again as the mother held the child close. Mira opened the vehicle door, and the mother sat inside with the child. Noor confirmed the destination and explained again that the mother would remain with the child during the check and rest period. The mother nodded, holding the child's hand tightly. Before the vehicle left, Mira leaned in and told the child goodbye in a gentle voice. The child stared at her for a moment, then gave a small nod. Ben stepped closer with Rex and allowed the child to see Rex one last time. The child lifted a hand and waved slowly. Rex stood and wagged his tail once, calm and steady, then sat again beside Ben. The vehicle door closed, and the vehicle drove away into the city traffic, carrying the child toward a safer place and a clearer plan. Ben returned to the platform area with Mira and Rex. The station lights reflected off the polished floor, and the daily rhythm resumed fully. Ben felt tired, but it was not the tiredness of defeat. It was the tiredness of responsibility, the kind that came after doing something that mattered. Mira walked beside him and said quietly that she would not forget the child's eyes. Ben nodded and said he would not either. He looked down at Rex and placed a hand on the dog's neck, grateful for the instinct that had cut through the noise. Later that evening, Ben filed the final report while Mira wrote her own notes. They recorded the timeline carefully and included the small details, including the air holes, the child's condition, and the steps taken to protect the family. Ben also wrote a note praising Rex's alert and controlled behavior. He knew Rex was trained, but he also knew training only mattered when a dog chose to act with perfect timing. Mira read the note and smiled softly, then added her own comment about Rex staying calm once the child was safe. When their shift ended, Ben and Mira stepped outside into the cool evening air. The city lights glowed, and trains continued to move through the station like steady rivers of people. Ben looked back once at the entrance where it all began. He knew tomorrow would bring another crowd, another rush, and another chance for something hidden to pass through unnoticed. But he also knew he would be there again, watching with the same steady focus. Rex would be beside him, ready to notice what others missed. And somewhere in the city, a child would sleep without being hidden, because one bark had turned fear into rescue.